I would like to invite our guests, if you would be so kind as to come on up. Yep, we will be here. There is a microphone ready for you. So we have Dustin Breitling sitting down right here on the left. I will give a very short introduction. Again, everything more substantial is online at praguemicrofestival.com. So Dustin is a PhD student attending Masaryk University based in Prague. He helps and has co-founded the Diffractions Collective, where I in fact believe you can view the video we've seen today. We have Petra Mogos sitting down next to Laura Naum. Both are members of the Kayet Collective and have visited us here from Bucharest. The last video was from their production. Then we have Rahul Molnar, who is here visiting from Budapest, and Zsolt Miklósvölgyi from also Budapest. He is here currently on a residency with the meat factory. Okay, now to get right into it, and I'll just, I guess I'll take a seat right here. Okay, yeah. To get right into it, as a point of order, I will sort of ask each collective or individual a question, and we'll try to get a discussion going, and then of course it'd be great if perhaps you yourself would have some addressed questions based on the work we've seen. So again, to go from kind of backwards in a truly retro-futurist way, I'd like to ask Kayet and Petra and Laura about the creation of nostalgia in what we saw with Vlad Nanka's work, because in a way, and we talked about this in the hours leading up to this event, that if we're talking about futurity and futurism, there's always a type of repressed dimension of perhaps trauma, of nostalgia, of the past creeping in. Futurism, on the one hand, seems to be a very, of course, forward-oriented, Promethean, scopic phenomenon, as we see it happening currently and in the past. But at the same time, there's always an element of retrospection and a type of a retrospective dimension to it. So could you maybe share some of your thoughts on this?
So basically, what we usually try to do with the magazine is maybe first and foremost try to document the surroundings that take place around us, and this has been perhaps the main focus that we have had with this project that we started 4 years ago. And along the way, we started with mainly issues of representation, but we realized gradually that there are perhaps more important or more pressing matters that should be tackled, and that us, the two of us, and all the other contributors that have helped us put this together, tackle in their day-to-day lives, but also in their artistic practices or in their work. And that is this idea of not just maybe investigating the traces from the past, but also trying to trigger this maybe what is usually called this radical imagination, because we saw that this kind of mutant version of capitalism, post-socialist capitalism, has shifted the local imagination entirely. It has maybe transformed it into this kind of sterile valves of, I don't know, meaningless voids. And we, I think the most important the task that we have is to try to maybe fill some of these empty spaces, some of these gaps with some forms of knowledge, after all. And I think the video that you all saw of Vlad is perhaps just a tiny instance of how the past can be used, how can it be traced, how it can be tackled in its original forms as fragments, because the way he understands this idea of nostalgia is in a fragmented, in a maybe distorted way, just like memory works, after all. And I think this and I think this is also something that I saw in Dustin's work. This idea of nostalgia, after all, if we dismantle it and we tackle it etymologically, we know that it is a longing for a home. And I remember two very interesting questions in your piece, Dustin. Are we going home? Is there even a home? You know, and I think especially the second question is exactly the kind of message that we also try to focus on. Is this past that we focus on, is it even real? Is it created? Is it constructed? As Vlad said in his own work. And after all these sorts of tiny slices of meaning and artistic practices we try to focus on those that we feel have been brushed aside from the dominant trajectory of modernity. And those are the ones, this kind of parallel layers, those are the ones that interest us more than what has been taught to us in school, in textbooks, history with a capital H and so on.
Absolutely. Maybe we can segue to Dustin right away, unless Laura would like to add something.
I think Petrika mostly said what. I think Petrika mostly said what I was thinking. Maybe I would just like to say that when we refer to the present, we always look in the past, but we always think about the future at the same time. So for us, when we talk about what we document and what we talk about, we always look at the past, but also at the future. Yeah.
Do you think maybe that Romania, and again through the work of Vlad Nanka, where he mentions this sort of layering, these strata of general cultural influences, he mentions the Latin and the Slavic and so on.
Yeah.
Do you think that in any way is noticeable in the work of Kayet, where similar strata are being unpacked or kind of worked through?
Yeah, of course, definitely.
Yeah, and I would say that maybe this moves beyond, civilizations or ethnic grounds as the ones that he mentioned, but it is also present in other kinds of social fragmentations that are present nowadays, from social classes or economic backgrounds and so on. And these are, I think, by focusing on these differences, in most cases, the overlying conclusion is that it is all almost the same, and that kind of shared past or shared present are the ones that unite us into something, and they give us a sense of solidarity, if that is
interesting.
there.
Yes, we're trying to talk about the future and keep coming back to the past.
Yeah, I know.
The way sort of it seems with what you said and the way Kayet presents these issues are largely sociopolitical. To move on to Dustin's work, I think he grapples with the past and with the future in a much more geophysical, microbial, biological level. And I would maybe like to ask about that because, again, just from our brief conversation beforehand, the piece was a sort of testament to the relationship of trauma and the future, with a bit of Stanislav Lem kind of put in there. Could you elaborate?
Yeah. So I didn't necessarily think of the film as having an overarching thesis in relation to futurity. If there's a temporal dimension or temporal element, it does associate itself with trauma. Since I mean, more or less with the film, yes, the bare bone plot is something that comes from Lem, because I was always interested in how Lem, every time Solaris has been translated in the film, he had strong misgivings about it, especially with Tarkovsky's version saying that he felt he was trying to create crime and punishment, and that he was trying to include this melodramatic human aspect, and it didn't necessarily dive into, let's say, the kind of inhumane element that could not necessarily be domesticated within kind of the human space. So I mean, and the other elements, or some of the work I was reading around that time was related to, for example, stress. Well, not stress. Actually, it's terror simulation theory, or terror simulation theory. So the whole notion of this is looking at how our dreams are actually rehearsals for basically catastrophic / threatening types of environments that we've evolved over the course of millions of years. So there's been studies that they've conducted with Kurdish and also with Finnish students, and they found, for example, with Kurdish students, since they've been inhabiting more adverse environments, there's greater frequency of them reporting narrative, traumatic types of events in their dreams and so forth. So I wanted to address and incorporate that and conceive of the planets. I didn't necessarily want to specify what the planet looked like in any sense or fashion. I mean, that's why, of course, with all the imagery there that I was compiling, it was just a kind of a myriad of planets that could be something that ideally would be what we'd like to inhabit, or it's something where we already have that resemblance of the past in this case. So tying in these elements of looking at trauma, also reading up on, well, I mean, basically the idea was the planet has deciphered the past of humans, and it comes with this kind of assumption that yes, there was a catastrophe, and the planet has deciphered kind of the memories and the dreams of our catastrophe, and the planet wants to reject humans coming in, like basically like an organ transplant, but it rejects humans. It has an inherent distrust towards perhaps human habitation. So that was more or less kind of the echoes that I wanted to keep with Lem, and then additionally reading up on epigenetics and kind of the traumatic inheritance, where they've also there's been the infamous Dutch famine study where, for example, when there was mothers and they were having children, during the famine during World War II, they found out the offspring of the mothers who had the children during the famine, they had higher tendencies of obesity, schizophrenia, as well. And they've also, we were discussing the other day as well, looking at Holocaust survivors, and how Holocaust survivors as well, apparently there's higher stress disorders amongst the offspring. So, and I suppose maybe just the last kind of theorist or person I was influenced by was Emmanuel Velikovsky, even though he's quite a crackpot. But his kind of whole concept too is looking at how generally the myths that we see across cultures, the kind of flood or great deluge myths, his whole kind of concept was that actually these were just events, even though his kind of whole, let's say, astrophysical understanding is a bit bonkers, because he was basically positing this idea that Venus at some point was ejected from the planet Jupiter. And what happened is this kind of shook up the whole kind of gravitational placement of the planets, and there was a constant bombardment on planet Earth. And this constant bombardment was something that triggered these types of traumatic events that humans over the course of time have attempted to kind of render through writing, and have constantly tried to come to grips with within their respective environment.
So your general kind of conceit in what you said is that trauma, in a way, is recorded not only on the level perhaps of language, but of the planet, of the body as well, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the fascinating aspect that's unraveling, is looking at how trauma is encoded genetically as well. I mean, even a lot of the recent studies that they've been doing with mice, I mean, it's even the mice don't even actually have to be I mean, there's been some studies too where they take out mother mice from the kind of offspring mice, and when the mother mice comes back, you know, the mother mice, maybe she hasn't been around her children for long periods of time. She's basically unresponsive. So what happens is the children themselves also start acting unresponsive, and they've noticed with the children and their offspring that they've actually also had kind of this exhibiting similar types of traits of kind of indifferent or actually also risky behavior in this case. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. I'd like to segue to Jolt, because I think we're talking about a type of cosmic trauma. It really comes up in your Mothership mockumentary, which we saw earlier. Could you maybe tell us a few words exactly about the, so to speak, Hungarian trauma as you presented there, with the suicide and the...
Oh yeah, of course. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure of being amidst brothers and sisters in crime and allies and comrades. So, talking of trauma, obviously, we've been discussing with Laura and Petrika yesterday that you know the 20th century. So one of the most crucial point of happening or event of the 20th century Hungarian history starts with the spatial trauma of losing a political or geopolitical territory. And on the basis of this territory or loss of territory, this kind of traumatization can be always monopolized by political forces, can be hijacked and to some degree, further exploited for power political usage. But what is interesting, if you turn it upside down and then you say that maybe it's not only something that can be hijacked or utilized for political, power making, you can also put it the other way around and think about it as something that has a geo-speculative potentiality to turn the existing plateau of thinking of the territory from a rather speculative way, where you can actually turn the imagery of the space into something else, and this is what we call, in the sense of Hungarofuturism, as xenotopia, which is the altering of the given imagery of the space we inhabit, not only physically but also virtually, politically, poetically.
We sort of, or actually, you informed me that upon the launch of the film, that there was criticism voiced against it in a way, because apparently, if I'm correctly understanding, you were appropriating Afro-futurism. And I just want to maybe riff on this as you presented this notion of space. Sun Ra, space is the place, but space is also, as you and the Hungaro-Futurist project in general construe it, it's a plane of an actual territory in a way. And I just want to ask about your perhaps reaction and your theoretical resolution to this alleged appropriation on your part.
Yeah, it was interesting to see because, for instance, the reporter Mia Imani Harrison, who's an Afro-futurist activist from Seattle, US, she came across to this whole concept of Hungarofuturism and was very much interested in having a kind of a confrontation in a positive way with this whole encounter. And then, yeah, exactly, there has been few, let's say, negative comments regarding this whole appropriation thing. But we always answer with the following: for us, Afrofuturism is both a resource of inspiration, but also, we differentiate like our struggles from the struggles of the Afro-American, population of the U.S. or North America, because obviously, their struggles are entirely different and incommensurable with our struggles, and therefore, what we would rather think about is to have a look at various ethnofuturist, attempts or endeavors, and try to form a form of solidarity amidst these various emerging ethnofuturist endeavors, and also to have this kind of, from a rather academic or discursive point of view, have this this space where these various ethnofuturists could radiate to each other and can fertilize in a creative way. This is what Mahan Moalemi, for instance, in our Xenotopia magazine, calls as relational futurism or comparative ethnofuturism, where these various forms or imaginary of futurities can be research from this comparative point of view. And this is, I think, a good start. Hungarofuturism, it's another question that we always got, that this Hungaro prefix, is it something that further perpetuates this kind of essentialist notion of nationalism, or what's the, why we don't call it like a Carpato-futurism or whatever, why we cannot come up with something more speculative. But on the other hand, it has a very fixed position in the political landscape of nowadays Hungary. So it's obviously, it has this kind of immediate reaction to what happens on the ground level of everyday politics. So yeah, sorry, I don't want to
Thank you very much. That was great. Our last speaker is Rahul Molnar, and you mentioned this sort of ground level of actually self-organization and cross-fertilization, and this is something which Rahul has been involved for years. She has come here with the Alterum project, which actually linked together artists and galleries and spaces across the wider Central European region. It was supported by a V4 grant, and apparently things kind of changed along the way. Could you tell us a bit about the whole project?
Yeah, it's and I'd like to also thank you for the invitation. Also because what you do here with this festival is pretty similar to what I'm gonna be talking about. I try to summarize it shortly because it can be, there is a very, very long version to it, but it went as follows. We started this with the idea in 2019, and it's important for me, I think, that first thing which is important, that in the end it's a project that I think more than 40 artists and theorists and curators worked on it, and everybody will have a very different idea in relation to it, so it's my perspective, but I was the initiator of this. Then we started to cooperate with Budapest-based artist-run gallery Mythe, and the whole idea of the Visegrad Fund came later. I mean, there was a network of people in the region, and we wanted to expand something that we felt we have in Budapest in terms of community and support and basically that for each other. And we wanted to see how it goes on the regional level, while we felt that we still feel the importance of DIY underground spaces and communities in arts and music in Budapest, and wanted to see what's the difference and actually what's going on in the neighboring countries, because we didn't have much. There are friendships, but we wanted to somehow frame it to a more organized, structured level where there is also money involved, basically. That's happened. And we started with 4 galleries from here, from Prague, from Košice, from Belgrade, and from Budapest. And the original idea was very much based on personal meetings, because one of the whole point of this project was to spend time together and to meet each other and to meet the scenes that we are talking about and wanted to research. But then COVID came and we had to transfer this whole thing to the online sphere, as most of us. And then this year 4 exhibitions happened, international exhibitions that featured works from young artists from these 4 countries in the partners galleries. And now we have the final publication that also wrote an essay into. That's the short story of the project.
I just want to maybe fill in that the Alterum magazine publication will be available in the 35 meter squared gallery.
Yeah, in like 2 weeks. Like by the end of the month, they will have their copies, and we'll have like 100 copies of it. So if anybody is interested, it's going to be free, and you can grab a copy at the gallery.
Of course, 35 meters squared. That's just almost down the street. I have a second question, and it's particularly about the video we saw. It was the second one, Fabrica Seduction. You made it as part of a residency at the Brno House of Arts in 2021.
I applied with this project to that residency. It's important that we did it together with Endre Černa, who is a very good friend from Hungary. He's also the editor of Utca és Karrier magazine. I just wanted to add that. That was it. And what is maybe interesting with that, it's a very different project, not at all connected to the Alterum and what I was talking about. But the funny thing is that I now realize that it's also like both of the projects deal with the other and otherness, but in a completely different viewpoint and like opposite, basically.
Did you actually get to go to the Brno House of Arts, or was it also due to COVID? Was it?
No, I went there.
Okay.
I spent a month there.
How did you like it?
The House of Arts or Brno?
Both.
The House of Arts team is amazing. Who I met there and who worked to make everything comfortable for us. And it was also a nice timing because I made some Czech artist friends there who we were together in the residency. Brno is somehow very big and very small at the same time. And in the summer, I was there in June, and I felt somehow time stand still, and I couldn't really decide if it's a nice feeling or if it's not. I'm not saying it pejoratively, but yeah, that was my impression.
Time standing still. That's quite amazing. I would like to open the floor for questions. If anybody has any, I would hand off the microphone to the audience. Are there any immediate questions for anybody here on the panel currently?
Actually, I have a question about Hungaro-futurism, if that's fine. Yeah, I'm quite interested, particularly, do you see the kind of intersection, because as far as I understand too, I mean, the term is also applied in Austro-Hungary in terms of serfdom, like robots as well. Like I think there was the robota serfdom system. If you see this kind of intersection as well with Afrofuturism, because I think one theorist I really like, Lance Taylor, he makes this whole point that he conceives Africans as just being genetically bred on a plantation, that they were technically the first or maybe not the first, but they really embody what a robot is in this case. And I'd be curious if there was this kind of intersection, because I really see, especially with Afrofuturism, the strong emphasis on the nature of the body in this case. Is the body, of course, as an object, and is a body that's socially bred for its purpose to kind of fulfill, whether it's a slave system or, as we see, kind of commodification, and also kind of questions as to where do we come with kind of reparations and slavery. So I'd be curious if this is something that was discussed.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good question, and I might be a little controversial here, because, or even provocative, in the sense that in terms of Hungarofuturism, the relation between the body and the formation of the nation is to some degree based on this rather right-wing, far-right nationalist, or let's say so, national socialist idea of the Volkskörper, the body of the nation. And what Hungarofuturism wants is to dismantle this body of the nature, to castrate it, to do like a kind of carnivorous autopsy of this body, and to then recreate and then bring it to the slaughterhouse, and then just pipe it into a huge sausage that we can shoot out to the outer space.
Zsolt is just now working in the meat factory on a culinary project, and he is in fact focusing on the way food and nationality or the act of nation building are interrelated. We did touch on the sausages. Could you tell us exactly what role sausages currently play in the in the political imaginarium?
So maybe let me start to just name a few culinary or eat art, gastro art projects we had with regards to sausages. One was that there's this Austrian, I don't know what's the name of the conceptual artist who had this project of, and if anyone knows from the audience, please help me out here. Günter Bruss, Günter Bruss had this project of the literary Wurst. I don't know if you're familiar with that. He was shredding Hegel's phenomenology of the spirit, and then made a huge sausage out of it, so that it becomes more consumable. So this kind of the metabolic, metaphoricity of like reading or like incorporating a text became like kind of physical. What we did is precisely the same kind of thing with one of the key authors of the Hungarofuturist pantheon, I would say, Ferenc Juhász, who was like this folkish, surrealist, neo-avant-garde poet who wrote a gigantic book of like a catalog of every creatures that could appear on the surface of the planet, something like this encyclopedic idea, and it's just impossible to read through this gigantic poetry book. And what we did is we also shredded it, but we made the sauerkraut out of it. So we fermented it, and then it started to ripen. We buried it in the garden of one of our friends, and then it became somehow digestible. A good friend of ours, and he's one of the other key founder of Hungarofuturist movement, Mário Nemes, for instance, ate the entire constitution, the new Hungarian constitution that was fabricated by the Fidesz, which is an absolute, nonsense constitution. So to point out this kind of absurdity, he combined it with a tripe soup, similar like the Slovakian or Czech tripe soup, but the Hungarian equivalent of it, it's a canned tripe soup. He shredded the constitution and then incorporated it.
Drżczówka.
Yes. So this is, I think, like this metabolic aspect or metaphoricity is kind of interesting. I don't know if I've answered your question at all.
Absolutely. There will be an exhibition.
So it's not only sausages. There are so many other interesting,
Sure. There will be an exhibition as part of the Photograph Festival coming up soon, curated by Lukáš Likavčan, which actually is focused on metabolism and a type of metabolic imaginarium, or the metaphor of the metabolism as such. And it's interesting just how sort of logistics and nation building and agro-politics feed into the construction of a national identity, as you were saying. I want to ask Rahul, because of course the whole futurist discussion is largely, as I said, kind of Promethean. It charts out paths towards the future. It is always a language, or arguably it is a language of power. Futurism has always had a very problematic relationship with the standing structures of power. And I kind of want to maybe turn the discussion on its head and simply ask Rahul about the position of hospitality, because as part of the Alterum project, I think most of the writers there actually, rather than charting futurist visions, focused on the relationship of the self and other, and in what way they interact on sort of in strange ways and in strange ecologies. And I would like to ask about this, whether this sort of ethics of hospitality in any way worked as part of the project.
Yeah, I'm absolutely. Actually, it was like a plus gift and surprise that when we started the editing process of the catalog and we started to talk about the topics, it just naturally came together in a really coherent whole. Both the topics of the forewriter and my additional preface. But the hospitality and the whole host and guest relation was something that went through the whole project, and that was one of the main ideas why when we actually started this. So it's kind of inherent. It's been inherent always, and also like talking about hospitality, it was. Not only in theory, but in practice, it was a main, for me that's maybe the main challenge to keep an eye on this on this question of the host, of the relationship of the host and the guest, because it's always in exchange, basically. It's always in mutation, especially in a project that is 2 years long. And even if we didn't meet, this topic of how do you create like platforms of collective caring and collective hospitality, and how do you make it real? I mean, when do you feel that it's not really a theoretic term, or it's not a flag that you can play with, but how do you act on a day-to-day basis to fulfill it in a community which is familiar but far from each other? That was something I'm still not sure if we managed. I'm not even sure if it can have an end. I mean, it's not. It's circular. The circularity is probably the. I don't know if I answered, but
I think so. We sort of touched on the role of languages and the way it must be simply difficult. Of course, we all use English, and I'm wondering how hospitable you, in fact, like find that realm, this Anglophone, internationalist community, which you've been interacting with in the, let's say, wider Central European region. Is there such a thing as, in a way, hospitality in English, or can hospitality only be offered in its, domestic language?
I think so. I mean, there are many different languages, not only spoken language, and I've been hosted by many people in the past few years, and I was the host of many as well, and rarely spoke each other language with our tongues, you know. But I think it's dependent on many things, but mostly other things than spoken language, actually.
Right. Are there any questions from the audience? We still have a few minutes before Ron Colm comes up. He will be reading along with the band Monstra, which we have coming. Are there any questions? If not yet, I would like to ask Petra and Laura. Kayet is currently producing a third artist documentary in the series, if I'm not mistaken. There's Vladnanka, whom we saw, then there's another one from last year, and this year there will be yet another featured artist. Can you tell us a bit about the project, please?
Yeah, so basically we've been trying to find new forms of producing meaning besides the magazine itself, and one of these has been the video format. The first one, as Vitek said, was with Vlad, the one that you saw. The second one was focused on the work of this very eccentric Romanian composer who is now in his late 70s. And he has this phenomenological approach to composing avant-garde spectral music. He is quite a character, and the video is up online. You can watch it on Vimeo. And the third one is focusing on the practice of another Romanian artist that currently lives in Switzerland, called Maria Guță, and she has this kind of a multiple personality disorder in which she basically jumps from one sort of identity to another. And I think that this also has something to do with what you were saying earlier about language. Her being a Romanian in Switzerland, having to learn French, German, and English as a sort of this kind of hybrid identity. She produces for this video that is coming up soon 4 different characters for each language, and she is basically trying to maybe interpret, maybe to give meaning and give life to words and to how various parts of the country of Switzerland also influenced her own being. And I think, this idea of language is also something that we have encountered as an editorial project. Perhaps we always have this kind of disclaimer when we talk about the magazine, and as you said, English is this kind of lingua franca that we have to accept. Is it a tender form of self-colonization, maybe slightly? And who are we, or who gives us the right to talk about Eastern Europe in the English language as if we are, in micro narratives that are coexisting in so many different regions, and we accept this kind of critique, but at the same time we always try to reverse it and to maybe see it as a form of I think this is also close to what you were saying, Rahel, about
I'm sorry, but what you can do, I mean,
that was going to be my next argument.
You have to connect somehow. So I don't like Eastern European. I actually don't like speaking in English much, because
Same.
you have these several identities with several languages, and each language you speak, you are a different person. I don't like my English personality that much, but still it's, I can't help speaking, like, no choice.
I totally identify with what you're saying, yeah. It is a sort of alter ego, like a different persona that we have to put forward. Of course, we are performing every day in Romanian and in Hungarian and in every language. But I think that the way we're doing it in English is perhaps the most artificial or the most performative in this kind of theatrical or synthetic way, I would say even. or at least that's how because we have these discussions every time, especially when we go to places that are, west from Prague. This is a critique that we have had to deal with, and I suppose that to a certain extent it is fair and honest, but at the same time, it's just a mechanism of not just democratizing knowledge, but just coping with, or trying to make this kind of knowledge more accessible to people beyond this region that we call Eastern Europe or Central Europe or Middle.
Laura, anything to add?
I think this topic of language is really interesting, and the fact that we embrace the English language, I think, is and we acknowledge this and we state it. I think it's really important for us. And as everybody said, if we want to spread our agenda to take over the world, we need to speak a common language. So for us, when we made Kayet, we made a conscious choice not to do it in Romanian, because we wanted it to be accessible to all the people that speak the English language. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions from the audience at this point? Danielle, please. And I will try to get you a microphone if I manage to do so.
So, no, it's okay. Thank you all for the presentations. My question would be directed at Dustin, because I remember last time that we met live here in the Micro Festival, you showed a movie about alien capitalism, and it was totally different to this one from the topic, and it's kind of, I would ask you what's the relationship between these two points of view? Are they complementary, or is it just against, like adding up to it?
Yeah.
More like suppress, and also what has been just mentioned about the language and stuff, because the last video was super intense in the textual part. It was really a dense message, and in this part, I think it was even an invented language, right? But
actually, no, that was Russian, Polish, and Czech.
Okay.
I was trying to get to all Slavic languages, but that just failed. I mean, actually speaking to this whole fact, because the initial impulse for me was to explore kind of this notion. I hate to use it because it sounds that it doesn't give kind of like the it sounds a bit homogenous in some sense, but I wanted to understand what Slavic sci-fi is. So I was kind of conducting interviews and / meeting up with friends, and I had a friend, she's Bulgarian, she was just telling me as well, we don't really have this kind of distinct notion of science fiction in this case, because she was claiming for her a lot of it was deeply about fantasy, about her regarding Bulgaria as this kind of ancient site that people visit and kind of really steeped in the past and so forth. So yeah, I wanted to use I wanted to, as I said before, the initial endeavor was see if I can get all these languages and put them in there, and then see if I can kind of explore and untangle what does that mean by Slavic sci-fi, because then I was also quite interested in, okay, I have to look at the kind of Orthodox, and I have to look at Catholicism, and look at perhaps how these inform it. And then I just kind of got to the point where I decided I'm probably just going to discard this idea altogether and just go focus more or less on the nature of alienness and xenoness in this case. And I was actually also I was interested in this idea how the universe suffers from like a dissociative identity disorder. And so that's purposely as well, even though it's only 3 languages, basically, what I wanted to kind of capture in the film there was that there wasn't perhaps a single person for each of the respective languages. I mean, because there was some parts where it was, I didn't include like a robotic text translator, especially in some of the Polish parts in this case too. So, and I just knew I'm not gonna, I didn't feel comfortable trying to come up with these common threads per se. So I just wanted to go back to that just basic idea of, Solaris and this idea of kind of the oceanic planet and something that's beyond our grasp, beyond our reach, our cognitive capabilities to pin down and exactly understand, but somehow, some way, it has an impact or influence upon us. There really isn't, I don't really see as much of a continuity, I suppose, because, yeah, of course, Alien Capital, the film I made, at the end, there is the point that basically capitalism has decided that it's going to, basically have a new type of experiment on a new type of colony in the universe, in this case. And yeah, I agree, it was quite didactic. And so this way I just wanted to strip away as much as possible and kind of keep the ambiguities. But it was, for me, I'm glad. I feel like the film failed in so many ways in what I wanted to do, and I completely embrace that. Because I suppose that comes up with the kind of inability to kind of speak and, well, not necessarily speak, but to see the nuances and the respective differences of something like science fiction and fantasy, or just science fiction, I suppose, in kind of the whole Slavic bloc. I hope that answers your question in this case.
Yeah, pretty much.
Are there any other questions from the audience? We have about 5 minutes. Or from the panelists, any comments?
Yeah, if I may just, I don't want to form it in this juxtaposition, but what I would be interested in is your take on, the take on this problem of locality in Dustin's movie. I was very much interested in if this kind of non-human or post-human planetary, narrative point of view or focality, does this have a local accent to it, or is it something that somehow transcends it? It's because it's interesting in a way, like with this pan-Slavic, imagery or envisioning. It appears that it somehow fixed this in a certain, paradigm of locality. Yeah, that's just a.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, the paradigm of locality is. I mean, that is a very important thing, because I'm very interested in Polish sci-fi. I mean, it's not just Lem, but of course looking at like Zułowski and these types of figures, and of course, me not being from this territory. I mean, the imagery there, the imagery, especially with films like him or Obia, Koniec cywilizacji, or the end of civilization. I mean, what I find that was kind of really striking, because I don't think I can really, I don't have the way to kind of articulate it as much as I'd like to. But of course, when I look at from also the circumstances of the Holocaust and how that was really influential, especially for someone like Lem, who never, explicitly addresses it in a lot of his work. There's only actually a passing. There's a passage in one of his books, his Master's Voice, where he is referencing how one of the scientists actually witnesses basically an execution of his fellow friends, and of course Lem was also Jewish in this case too. So, and this was kind of what he was confronted with, obviously the ultimate terror of his execution. In a lot of his books, I think this is kind of the recurring concept that he views it perhaps from a local perspective, that yes, there are these kind of inherent tendencies for us to be carrying out atrocities and carrying out Holocaust and so forth. But then from his kind of wider cosmic perspective, he kind of sees this as the kind of natural forces of entropy in this case, and kind of more or less saddling those two types of viewpoints in this case. And there's even in some of his works where he has one robot actually witness basically a massacre on a spaceship. And the kind of the question that's gripped there with the robot is should the creator of the robot actually destroy the memories of that, of what happened, or should they preserve it? And I think for someone like Lem, yeah, I think this is something he was probably really wrestling with his whole life, but he didn't really want to kind of particularize it, and that was what I was kind of refraining from in some sense. So that's why the initial impulse, I knew it was never going to be fulfilled, because there's obviously specific types of histories and narratives and languages and conceptions of something such as science fiction that I don't think there can be. I mean, well, I can't say it, but I didn't really want to just find a common point and then just erase the nuances in this case. So, yeah.
Just to follow on this lineage of thought, I was wondering if Laura and Petrika would have something to add with regards to this idea of futurity in the sense of lost futures, or having this kind of weird, nostalgo-futuristic, sensibility towards failed attempts of utopist visions, and whether if it has this kind of accentuation in the realm of locality as well, like whether if it would be worth of investigating on a comparative study of the fragmentation of various failed attempts of utopian socialist visions in our region.
I think the first example that comes to mind is another sort of research project that we developed called Camera Archiva, which is this digital platform, and also a book which we brought and should be found somewhere on the table, about editorial projects, basically the publishing industry that existed between 1947 and 1989. And we, not exclusively, but we had this kind of very specific interest in also unearthing science fiction related and other kind of futuristic attempts to imagine what would happen in this kind of imaginary future that never happened, actually. And I think it is quite interesting we were very impressed by not just the diversity, but just how many of such instances existed before 1989 in the Romanian publishing industry. And I think this also, maybe if I were to extrapolate and maybe to try to link it to some sort of bigger picture, and also to go back to this idea of the future, we could say that, or at least one of our conclusions was that, of course, leaving aside all the repressive and oppressive mechanisms that were in function in socialist Romania, this kind of bureaucratic and very tightly led society was one, at least in terms of its publishing industry, was one that was future-oriented and that was in this kind of active search for, an active act of imagining some sort of forecasting, some sort of anticipation of what could happen the day after tomorrow. And I think those were the tiny slices of futures that never happened, that could be not just, the easiest way of understanding them is, of course, we have something to learn from them. But I think it is actually much more than that. It is about, or at least to us, it is their value is derived from the fact that they were coexisting, that they lived together under this, this shared canopy of multiple futures. And I think futures in the plural is a formula that maybe should be used more often. It is this kind of, the possibility of engaging with lots of different pathways that lead us into various futures, rather than this kind of singular trajectory toward a prescribed or a future that has been decided by some kind of arbitrary forces. And yeah, this is something that we identified in the archive.
Okay, thank you very much. Time is pressing, the future is upon us, and it is time to leave the stage for Raunkolm and Monstra. I would like to say that we've only perhaps broached some of the topics and themes which are still ahead of us, and tomorrow we will meet for a very similar session. We will have presentations by Dustin Breitling, as well as Adaptive Collective, Daniel Huttler and Janina Weissengruber, and we'll be joined by Louis Armand for a very similar debate on very similar topics with all our present guests present. I would once again like to very much thank Petre Mogos and Laura Naum, Dustin Breitling, Rahul Molnar, and Scholt Mikosvolgi. And thank you.